Hi everyone, my name is Joseph, and today I want to discuss Vikings, specifically Vikings up to season 4. So really quickly, let me pull up the dates. Vikings first premiered on History Channel March 3rd, 2013, and then season 4 premiered on November 30th, 2016, and ended on February 1st, 2017. So the reason why I'm going to discuss Vikings in two different segments is because so minor spoilers for anyone who doesn't see the show, but the show actually follows or rather two generations of characters. The first generation being Ragnar, his brother Rollo, and his wife Lagertha, and the second half of the show, so from season 5 and onward, there's 6 seasons, focuses on Ragnar's sons, which would be Bjorn, Ube, Histfric, Sigurd, and Ivar. And yeah, so that's why I'm going to discuss the show in two different segments. I just finished watching the first, or excuse me, I was gonna say the first half, but I personally, because I have seen this show already, I'm rewatching it. For me, it really is split into two halves because of one participation in the community. One would notice that a lot of people talk about the show up to a certain point, and then discussing it post that point. So I'm going to stop being vague and I'm going to be specific again. There are going to be spoilers in this video, but what I'm referring to is Ragnar's death. So Ragnar Lothbrok, the main character, the protagonist of the show. I would also include Athelstan as minor protagonist and King Egbert as well. But Ragnar, he actually ends up being killed within the show, within season 4. Actually, he ends up being killed. I actually have it put up right here. Season 4, episode 15, All His Angels. And what makes it really interesting is that if one is aware about popular media or just entertainment in general, it's not often where any piece of media, be it a show, movie, book, short story, short film, and so forth, it's not common where the protagonist is killed off and new characters are introduced. In fact, off the top of my head, the only example that I could think of one semi-example and one real example. The first one being a video game, Resistance 3, where the main character, actually not Resistance 3, Resistance 2, leading into Resistance 3, where at the end of the Resistance 2, I believe the main character's name is Nathan Hell. He ends up getting killed by Joseph Capelli, or Joe Capelli, and you actually play as Capelli, I believe that's his name, in the Resistance 3. He's now the protagonist that one plays as. I personally did really enjoy the Resistance trilogy. There might be some different opinions about that. We're not going to discuss that though. The other semi-example that I have, essentially I just want to point out that I personally did enjoy how Insomniac, the creator of Resistance, handled that plot beat, that narration choice. I think they did a really fine job with it. And the other semi-example that I have will be Bram Stoker's Dracula. That one's a bit different though because the first quarter of the novel is told from Jonathan Harker's perspective, and then after that, the rest of the novel is just kind of told from the perspective of Mina Harker and the rest of the gang. But Jonathan is still present within the novel. The story is no longer being told from his perspective or from his point of view. So the fact that Vikings went with this choice, went with this decision, I'm not going to lie, as someone who was watching the show while it was airing, when it was live, I did have my concerns and my doubts. I was actually debating if I should continue the show after Ragnar's departure. Thankfully for me personally, I did continue watching it because I was interested in the other characters that were introduced after his death. As I already pointed out, the sons. The show does a really great job. Michael Hurst, the writer, does a really good job of making sure that all the sons have their own personalities and have their own individual personalities. You will have a favorite, and you will also have a least favorite as well. My favorite is Ube. For whatever reason, I was always gravitated towards Ube. I think he's the most I can't pronounce words sometimes. Reminiscent. There we go. I was gonna say resonance, which is something different. He's the most reminiscent towards Ragnar, I would argue. With Bjorn being a close second. But both a cool thing about this show, but also kind of an annoying thing, is how one is able to pinpoint when they stop disliking a character. But I'm not going to go too much into that because Bjorn's character, for the most part, I actually do really enjoy him up into season 4. But I'm not going to lie, there are some choices and decisions that he makes as a husband and a father. I was going to say father. Father and husband put together. There's a character named Harbert, that's why. So father, husband, Harbert, it all started combining in my head. Anywho, Bjorn, he's not the best father nor husband, unfortunately, and that really continues to show beyond season 4. Although I do start disliking Bjorn a little bit post season 4, so 5 and 6, up to season 4 at the very least, Bjorn still has his very likable qualities, and I won't be surprised if a lot of individuals they still very much enjoy and appreciate Bjorn's character. But I won't say much more beyond that because these sons they're only introduced for the last 5 episodes of season 4, since Ragnar passes away in episode 15, and season 4 is comprised of 20 episodes. Let me quickly check that. I do believe it's 20 episodes. Yeah, 20 episodes. So we only get introduced to the Sons of Ragnar for 5 episodes, but the show does a good job of making sure one has their favorite, possibly an inkling of who might be their least favorite, and looking forward to the start of season 5, where the story picks up with the Sons of Ragnar. Besides of Ragnar, I've really been focusing on him and then his sons. When the sons only comprise about 5% of seasons 1 through 4. Let's go ahead and move on to the other characters. So Athelstan. And one is ever looking for a show that does a really great job, in my opinion, about portraying friendships or quote unquote romances. I think this show is a really great example of that through the use of Athelstan, Ragnar, and then King Egbert. So in this show, there's actually a kind of a friend triangle, rather than a love triangle where the protagonist is in love with the girl, and that woman is in love with some other dude. And it's a whole messy thing. In this instance, it's just 3 guys who just want to be friends with one another. And the reason why they want to be friends with one another is because they all respect and admire each other's ideologies. Athelstan is a Christian monk who ends up becoming the slave of Ragnar, but then Ragnar ends up freeing him and ends up working very closely with Athelstan. Athelstan ends up beating Egbert when Athelstan starts raiding with Ragnar in Wessex, and he ends up getting caught and actually crucified. The reason why King Egbert rescues or saves Athelstan is because of his role and because of his mindset and ideologies that he being Egbert just respects. Essentially, one of my favorite quotes from the show is when Ragnar, so again, spoilers, unfortunately Athelstan does pass away. I won't say for what reason, but I think the show does a decent job, a good and interesting job of explaining why he has to go. But Ragnar, when he's giving his eulogy, he tells to the corpse of Athelstan that I'm paraphrasing, that Athelstan may have believed that he was weak for being confused about his religion because he was a devout Christian, but also he did see merit in the pagan gods as well, more specifically the Norse gods, Thor, Odin, Loki, and so forth, right? The Valkyries and everything like that. I like a little line that Athelstan says that when it rains, he hears God and the raindrops, but he also hears Thor and the thunder that sounds when it rains as well. But going back to Ragnar, he states that although Athelstan may have considered himself to be weak for the fact that he was confused about his religion, Ragnar actually considered that to be a strength of Athelstan, and he believed that's what made Athelstan gain his courage and his bravery, because he was willing to question. Really awesome, really cool. More than likely, we'll be doing a separate video discussing the relationship between these 3 characters, just because, again, they really emphasize the mindset of Ragnar and why he behaves the way that he does. He's not your typical Viking. He definitely still does do the actions of other Northmen, such as pillaging, raping, unfortunately, but that's part of their culture of the past, right? I'm a bit happy to the show. Although Ragnar, he does do those actions, he's not portrayed as often as the other Northmen, and I'm glad that the show does do that, because obviously it will be really hard for the audience to support a protagonist who's doing those actions without any remorse or without any recourse. But thankfully, Ragnar, he thinks about the things that he does, and that's not just true for his character, but true for other characters as well. But again, I'm going a little bit ahead of myself. That's more for post-season 4 discussion. And then also there's Lagertha. One is interested in a strong female character. Lagertha is definitely an example that I always like to point to. Lagertha is a great character. She goes through her own character arc. She, at the start of the show, is Ragnar's husband, but then she becomes her own individual person. She becomes an earl. She has her own little... is it an earldom, not a kingdom? Because she's not a... Well, she does eventually become a queen, but at the start, she has her earldom that she watches over her people. Actually, no, excuse me. I'm thinking about post-season 5. Pardon me, spoilers about that. But within season 4, she never does become a queen. She's only an earl, and she makes sure to take care of her earldom. And Lagertha's character is also cool because one could tell that she cares for Ragnar, and that care is 2 ways. But unfortunately, the only reason why they're not together is because, well, of historical documents. It is a historical show, more towards the historical fiction than the historical portion. But still, it is based on history, right? But also because I would argue that they both still care about one another. The show does a good job of showing how Sometimes one can't just follow their heart and the emotions, but rather they have to go by duty and obligation as well. So yeah, so would I recommend Vikings? Yes, I really would. At the very least, if one is concerned about the fact that the protagonist gets killed off, if one is concerned for the last 5 episodes of season 4, they don't like any of the sons of Ragnar, then I would say that you could stop at season 4, or better yet, you could even stop if one wants to at the death of Ragnar. But I wouldn't suggest that. I mean, when he passes away, there's only 5 more episodes left in the season. I would suggest just finishing it up. But yeah, I would really recommend the show. I think the show does a really great job setting up plot lines and characters that one is going to care about. There are some minor elements that one may frown upon, such as a lot of B-side stories, unfortunately, don't really play out the way that it should, as in there's really no payoff to them, such as, for example, Bjorn's first wife, Thorin, which is actually kind of interesting. I have to look more into the background stories about that. Essentially, according to the light research that I did, it's possible that Thorin just gets removed from the show because Michael Hurst's daughter, I forgot her first name, but obviously her last name is Hurst. She actually ends up playing one of the characters on the show, Tordvi, who's Bjorn's second wife. I was unaware about that, and I was confused about when I rewatched the show. I was reminded about Thorin's sudden conclusion, and so I did some light research, and I discovered about that. So it's unfortunate that is true, that her story was ended due to background issues. But there's other elements of the show as well where B stories just don't have the best of conclusions, unfortunately. And that's very much true for the first 4 seasons, but also post Ragnar's story as well. Despite that, though, I would argue that the whole definitely outweighs the small negative minor components. And if one enjoys a fun story with great dialogue, interesting dialogue, and great set pieces, I would highly recommend Vikings, especially if one has seen The Last Kingdom. The Last Kingdom, I would argue, is definitely much more following the history and the historical part of historical fiction, while as Vikings, again, is going to be following more the fictional part than history. But they're both still stories set in medieval times and the Viking period, the Northman period, and the forming of England. So again, if one is interested in that, I would highly recommend the show. You'll more than likely fall in love with Ragnar. Travis Flamel, I believe that's the actor's name. He does a phenomenal job of portraying Ragnar Lothbrok. He's definitely one of those actors that grows into the character, a lot like Angel Lincoln with Rick Grimes in the first season of The Walking Dead. Andrew Lincoln. I was trying to remember the actor's name. Lincoln does a decent job of portraying Grimes, but one could definitely argue that when you watch the last episode of Rick Grimes' appearance in The Walking Dead, the main show, and even compare Lincoln's performance in The Ones Who Live, I would argue that one will be very much highly impressed with the later iterations of Rick Grimes compared to the start. And again, that's because the actor grew into that character. They really seem to understand and they really seem to understand the mindset of that character and portray it in such a way that it felt immersive and quote-unquote real. And again, Travis Flamel does a great job doing that with Ragnar's character. So yeah, again, I would highly recommend this show. If you have seen the show, please do let me know. Did you watch the whole series, or did you stop after Ragnar's death? I'll be honest, as someone who is also a fan of The Walking Dead, I see quite often, quote-unquote, I stopped watching after Glenn's death. More common versus quote-unquote I stopped watching after Ragnar's death. It seems like for the most part the community continued watching Vikings even after Ragnar's execution. Whereas with The Walking Dead, it seems like a good chunk of the community unfortunately stopped watching The Walking Dead after Glenn's death. What can us make of that? I would argue it might go back to storytelling. That would be for a separate video. Maybe I'll do a thinking about in that regard. Why does one character's death work while another character's death does not work? Especially when one is a protagonist and the other one is a side character. It might be a side character, Glenn, but a very much important and favorite, a very much a fan favorite and important character within the show. So again, thank you so much for watching and listening. I do appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.